Well, well, well. Can't even believe it.
Can't even believe
Everyone,
it.
welcome to the show. This is Deep Feels. I'm your host, Liam Garrow, opening the show as always with my friend AJ Vogie. AJ, remember, this is an ongoing saga. For continuing listeners of the podcast know, audio has always been a real thing for me. And you've been so good. Careful of that hoodie on that mic.
What are you talking
I
about?
have always been, you've always been, listen, here's how you record dual audio. Let me get on top of this. And, I was always like, I forget, I forget, I forget. God bless AJ Vogie coming to the rescue as per usual. 10 minutes before we get on this call, he texts me. He's like, here's what you do. This is all the prompts you need to hit, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, great. So I opened it up. Wouldn't you know it? I had been recording truly like every single line of audio the entire time, and I just had no idea where it was going.
The entire time.
The entire time. The
W-
audio for this show could have been leaps and bounds better than it has been the entire time, and I just had no idea.
A leaps and a bound is really has really no point of reference or scale. So it's like that could be a lot or that could be a very little amount. Like some things leap very far depending on their size of their body, but like some things don't.
It's funny. You can tell you're an improviser because you're like, I'll yes and literally whatever you say. I also have to
Liam,
tell
yeah.
you,
What did you go look? Did you? What happens when you go and you click on the file where it records to, and like it records to a folder, right?
if that mic scratches on your hoodie one more time, I
Oh, I'm
swear
sorry.
to gourd. The thing is, that's right. That's exactly perfect. Also, we have to talk about and people listening can't appreciate this, of course. This is the longest I've ever seen your hair. Like before, like the thing is, like last week and the few weeks that we've been recording, I'm like, oh yeah, like it's long, it's long. This is probably the first time where I'm like, oh my God, you're an anime character.
It is truly getting to be like I feel like yeah. Even I had to shoot a self tape the other day, and when I looked it back or whatnot, I looked at it. I was like, oh, so this is what it's becoming. It's starting to get the ability. Yeah, I know. Look, yeah. Check me out. Check out any photo of me. I have shorter hair. It's not that short because
No,
I
it's
was
like you're ready to come like kamehameha like right into my heart. Do you know what I mean? Like full
yeah.
Dragon
That's
Ball Z. Like
yeah. Oh
you
yeah.
are,
Like hop on like a cloud that moves with lightning speed. Yeah, I would do
yeah,
that.
yeah. You really are my Goku. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I do. I think that's Dragon Ball Z, right?
That's right. I
Did you
also
watch a lot? Did you watch a lot of anime or Dragon Ball Z growing up,
that was my
or
best
still?
friend. Got the DVDs. I my so when I was a little kid, my best friend at the time was a kid named Grayson Adolph. He now goes by Grayson Niles because
His
and
last name was Adolf.
you better believe it.
Hmm.
I know, and
No, but like his first name was Adolf. Like I don't think of. I think of it as being a bad first name, but if it's your last
it's just
name,
not a great name.
it's just not what you want to draw. Yeah, it's probably
No.
not.
So his show of choice was Dragon Ball Z. Like that was majorly his one. I could never get on board because to me, do you know what it really honestly did feel like? I had the same criticism of Dragon Ball Z that I also had of like soap operas where I just felt like it was so slow moving.
I was going to say the same thing that I felt like it was a soap opera because I was just like, and I'm like, how long has this thing been running? Like, do I have to start from the beginning? Do I have to jump in the middle? I don't know who anybody is. I don't know. Nothing is stakes for me here. I'm not, it's not for me.
And also just like and but very similarly though to soap opera pacing, like they will hold on a moment truly for 5 episodes.
It truly was. Yeah.
Okay, so in a traditional soap opera, it's like always like the joke is like it's the steely glance of like, what do you mean you were with Robert last night? And then it's like, the music sting, and then everyone's sort of looking at each other, blah, blah, blah. And then of course the Dragon Ball Z equivalent is like, how long are you gonna hold this energy ball for?
Well,
Just let
that's
it go.
because I think there's a lot of it there. As someone who hasn't seen the show, that there's probably like takes a lot of power physically. Like maybe it's more of a
Mm.
character aspect that like oh look how strong they are. They can hold this gaze for so long.
I know, but also this is why
Also
I
true.
was a real Pokemon Digimon guy, because I'm like, the story's moving forward. Do you know what I mean?
Digimon, you did Digimon? I mean, I did Pokemon, but I didn't do digital monsters.
I fell off of Digimon way faster than I did Pokemon. I
Of
think
course.
with Digimon, why didn't I like, do you know what's so funny? I was actually literally thinking about this yesterday because it happened to like come up on my feed for some, like sometimes, someone will just post on Twitter like, oh, remember this, and it's just, what from whatever. And someone posted stills from like the Digimon movie, and I was remembering actually how dark that movie and cartoon was. Like it
I
really was a lot
okay.
about like death.
Was it really? Please go on.
Yeah.
I was into Pokemon, and now I'm obsessed with the like animals
Po-
being servants like that. I think that's a lot
well,
of fun.
we love to serve an animal. Listen, we love a service dog. We love a service pig with wings. The thing is, like with Digimon, it was very much like it always. Here's what was always on the table: this character that and small animal that can talk that you've come to love. We're gonna get rid of them at any time. Not unlike a soap opera. Like you think you love Darren, Darren could be out of here in a heartbeat. But then you know
Like
what?
they kill them all. Like they physically kill them.
And then 2 years later, they come back as like a better, stronger version of themselves. You're like,
Oh,
oh my god,
Saruman.
yeah.
Which is it was tough when he falls. Like that's a tough moment. That's
Oh,
tough.
is that Lord of the Rings?
That is Lord of the Rings.
Pokemon I liked because it was very light in tone, and I
Right.
liked that the universe kind of always restarted itself every episode, but still like they were moving forward in the story. Do you know
Yeah,
what I
they're
mean?
still on a journey. There's still the overall canon of being like, listen, now we have to go beat Lieutenant.
So,
I'm trying to remember the
Lieutenant Surge,
Surge. Yeah, that's Lieutenant Surge. Did you play the video game,
of
the Game Boy
course.
games? Blue.
Of
Would you play Blue? I played Blue and Yellow.
LOL. Okay, I played. I already at this point knew my color palette. I was like, I know I'm not a summer, so I was playing
Right.
blue, silver, and crystal.
Oh, you did Silver and Crystal. Could you change the
Yeah,
time of day on that? And
yeah,
then
you could.
and then could you?
It was
And
like
you'd have to
day, then it was
catch.
night,
Would you
and
have
only
to?
certain Pokemons were available. Yeah, during certain. Yeah,
Wow.
I
I
know it
didn't
was,
like Yellow sucked because you start with Pikachu, and obviously like Pikachu is going to be your number one go, right? Like
and he'll
it's
never evolve. He always rejects the
I know, and
stone.
you if you I think I did it once where you did something like you have to like because I also did all that multiplying master balls and stuff like that where
Oh,
you
the cheat,
go
the missing now, of course.
missing now, of course, and then you get like a level 150 like gold duck or something.
Love
Yeah,
that.
I ran the final six with that. But with that with the yellow Pikachu right behind you, so he's fighting all the time, and then you get to Brock the very first trainer.
I know you're so
None of the electrics work on him. Like, what is the point?
So you know what I would always do? I would always catch a Caterpie, evolve it to a Butterfree real quick, and I'd confusion the hell out of people.
See, did you? I would love, yeah. Butterfree was great because they also had like Slam and stuff. I also like
Mm.
Beedrill because I just thought Beedrill was a bit more of like an attacking kind of tone, which was just like, listen, I need some
Mm.
firepower. I'm just starting out. I got to look tough. That was sort of my approach.
I was also into Pokemon that looked beautiful. Do you know what I
Of
mean?
course.
Like
Oh yeah.
I was already curating my life. Do you see what I'm saying? I like,
Oh, of course.
and
Well, you
my
got to surround yourself. You gotta see yourself and the things around you. That's what you should be trying to strive
That's
for.
right. Let me ask you this: were you the kind of person who you were like, I'm aiming to catch them all, or I just want like six that are really strong?
Yeah, I think I probably tried to catch them all, but I ended up not. I think it was more about just getting. Once I got Mewtwo. Once you get Mewtwo, you're laughing.
Be-
I think it was just about beating the game, honestly.
I was always that way. I was like, this time I'm gonna catch them all, and then you like catch 12, and you're like, oh, so much time
Well,
training
because there were
them.
so many that like if you find the legendaries like Zapdos, Articuno, and
Moltres.
Moltres, thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Um, if you fuck them up, you fuck it up. Like you never see it again. So you
You,
have to like avoid
yeah.
it, and then I got to go back and get Articuno. That's a ton of work. Anyways, totally worth it.
You and I have discussed this though, which is that if you and I, because you and I have had this conversation over like if we had
This
met as
conversation exactly,
children.
actually.
I'm reading off my notes. It's I just have post-its around my screen of my lines. And when you were young, but you and I have had this conversation about if you and I were children and we had met as younger people, would we have been friends? And I said yes, because actually you, I think, as a child would have not been dissimilar to Grayson in that you were like a very big energy and outgoing. And I actually was not. I was very shy and quiet. I think you would have like had to like draw me out and then we would have been on the same the
Oh
same
yeah,
page.
I could see us running around a playground. I could see
Yeah.
that, and then like being partners in projects, or like you're in a group project, and you just have a good time because
I
you're like
know.
it's grade 4, like grade 3, like no one really cares about the work you're doing.
Do you know what's something that's so funny though? Grayson and I hung out after school all the time. We never once hung out together in school.
Oh, that's interesting.
We had totally different social circles because also we were never, no, wait, that's not true. We In grade
Did you
two, we're
live
in the
close
same
to each other?
class.
Did you live close to each other or
We
something?
sure did.
That
Literally,
helps.
it was like, I think I actually did count one time when I was a kid because like that's what you do. And honest to God, it was like 50 steps from my front door to his front door.
Oh, so you were
We were
neighbors
like,
too. Oh,
oh
I
yeah, yeah.
loved I neighbor friendship. See, the thing is though, for me, so much of it was like my friends in school. I saw very few of them outside of school. It would be like I could think of one really that I saw. Jason Tomafichuk. I think I've mentioned the Tomafichuks on the show.
Hi. Yeah.
Um, and then, but then on that it would be neighbors because I lived in cul-de-sacs always. So it was always like if there's kids around. One time,
Hmm.
Mark and I got in a fight. Mark is he was French, spelled his name Marc, and they spoke French at home. They were really nice. Him and I got in a fight once. We didn't talk for a while.
What was the fight about?
I can't remember, but I just remember like wrestling with him on the ground, and then him like I think both of us probably crying.
Yeah.
And then I remember us not. His little brother Eric is the first one to knock out my front teeth or chip my front teeth. That kid
Grayson
was
and I, funnily enough, it was not smooth sailing with Grayson at first because the reason he and I sort of were like sandwiched together was because his teenage sister, or maybe even his mom, was basically like, I will step forward and volunteer to like look after your son when he comes home from school. It wasn't like, oh my God, I'm best friends with Grayson. Great. Isn't this nice? So in the beginning, it was really like, it was not a good time. Like, because again, he was very
awkward.
outgoing and a big energy, and I was not. And so much so that I actually remember he'd be in the basement playing video games, and I would kind of just like walk around the main floor because I didn't want to hang out with him. Anyway, but I remember,
I guess so. I don't know. But what did you do? Just like love and like pick up something on a mantle, like gaze at it for just like half a second, and then well, almost a second too long,
yeah,
and
and
then
just be,
and then go, huh, and just put it down and keep walking.
and then do it with the next object right beside it.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember one of our kind of like earlier like little tiffs was we were playing Mario Kart 64, as you do.
Great
And I
game. Great
remember,
game.
so he went to the bathroom, and what I heard was like, basically, I heard like, go ahead and finish this if you want. And then he came back though, and he was like, what are you doing? And I was like, you told me I could play. And then he was like, I told you not to play. And then I tried to make it seem like it was some like I had some big victory. And I was like, because I was like, well, just so you know, like I managed to get you in third place. He's like, I would have gotten in first. I'm like, well, Grayson, like we're all trying here.
Did you
Like,
get him into third place? Because that's pretty good.
it's not. I mean, I think third place is like,
As someone who's played the game, like the whole like all four races essentially. Yeah,
yeah,
like you're going for
you're going for
first.
gold. You're going
You're
for
going for
gold.
gold. Yeah.
I have to tell you this new development, and can I tell you, and you know me fairly well, and I think you would also be, and maybe you've already become privy to this. I don't know. This might shock you to know that on my Twitter feed, can I tell you what I've taken to doing?
No.
I'm telling you anyway. Wouldn't you know it? I've started posting full-on thirst traps. Isn't that insane?
Oh, I saw one of your butt. I saw your
Yeah,
butt.
totally.
How's that going? What's that about?
I mean, I don't
Let's
know
talk about
what it
that.
is. Part of me is like, is this my COVID brain being like, this is a
Right.
good idea now? Like, so much of
Right.
it is me just being like inside my house being like, oh, what do I do now? But the reason I'm
You gotta
sharing
keep
that,
the thing is that you gotta keep content
keep
coming.
that content coming. Well, and it's so funny. I totally had a nightmare experience. So yesterday where someone fully like, and we followed each other. So like it wasn't, and he wasn't being lascivious about it at all. He just like sent me a message. He was like, oh my God, loving the pictures. Great, great, great. I'm like, thank you so much. And then he said like, the three dreaded words that no one wants to hear when they like post a thirst pic, which is, you're so brave.
Brave. Yeah.
And I
So
was
brave.
like, I have to kill myself.
Is that what
I
they said? They
guess.
said that this person
Oh
said
no,
you're so
I'm telling you, that's what he said. He said
honestly
the
though,
three
you
dreaded
are
words.
brave. You are. Like
Thank you.
outside of these photos, I'm like, Liam is brave.
Thank you.
I would tell and I'd love to tell you that.
My thing though is like, it's just so funny to me where I'm like, it's like this, and like I'm like a totally average sized person, but what I do also know about myself is like all my weight really does go to my butt. Like I really do have like what the kids are calling a dump truck ass. Like, and I know that I do.
There's been times, remember even until that time of our New York trip is when we were walking down the street and these kids yelled at me, yelled at you, look at that dump truck ass.
Well, I'm glad you remembered. And so, but like, so like I know that's the case, but it's so funny. Like I am otherwise like a very averagely sized and very like averagely proportioned person. But because I am not like a gym fit, like washboard abs, like look at me running 10 miles every single day kind of person,
A gym rat.
the second a gym rat does not, the second a gym rat posts a photo of like their body, people are like, wow, must have taken a lot of courage. Did you meditate beforehand? Did you like,
That
did
reminds me
you,
of there's a blog I used to follow. It's called "Fuck Your Noguchi Coffee Table." Noguchi Coffee Table is just like I think a designer coffee table or whatever.
uh-huh.
And the whole point of this thing was like people who would take nice apartments of their. It was just like a blog of people who would take photos of their like nice apartments and nice photos, but it was all just being like, "Oh, fuck you and your like antique clock that fits perfectly on the wall or whatever." And that's the whole thing. But it was just like obviously it was nice. It was nice to get inspiration for what you could do for your apartment.
Yeah, it
That's
actually
sort
was
of
it was the inspiration for my Pinterest board.
but
But
it's the same
yeah.
thing. It's just like fuck. Okay, fuck off.
Yeah, fuck off you with your like washboard abs. Like, you know, you want to know something? Here's what it is. Anyone can go to the gym, AJ, and I am really making a statement as someone with a very prevalent punk rock background, and you know this about me.
Mm-hmm.
I am very anti-establishment, and I refuse to strengthen my core. And that's something that I want people to know.
Honestly, you're so brave.
Thank you so much. Let's get into a few housekeeping things. One, Mark Harris is confirmed for the show. So
Sick.
people, very exciting. So people need to buy their copy of Mike Nichols' A Life. I want you to read up on it. I am recording with Mark on the 29th, which means that his episode is coming out on April 5th. So it's basically like, yes, I'm going to interview him and talk to him, but the whole sort of like gas in the tank for the episode really is like it's book club. Like we are talking about the book. So I would encourage people to buy it so they can follow along and have maybe, let's say, a greater appreciation for what we're getting into here. And also, as someone who's in the throes of reading the book now, it's so well written. And I know that sounds convenient for me to say. It is so good.
Save it for the interview. That's what I say. Save it for the interview, Liam.
Save it for the tape. Mark Harris is such a good writer. So people should buy that book to keep, on track with us when his episode is released on April 5th. Now, when this episode gets released, this will be on March 22nd. So that evening, if you manage to get a hold of me before like really 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, there are still 2 slots open for my pilot writing class. So we're basically almost sold out here. So if you are someone, or if you know someone who is a writer or wants to sort of get into that world, if you have an idea that you want to flesh out.
Can you send me that link? I was talking to a friend of mine whose brother is writing a pilot, and the pilot itself, it sounded soft in but but then I was mentioning it, and then he was like, oh, I might get that for my brother as a gift. Can you see if for real send that to me?
Well, here's what people do actually. If they want to get in touch with me about that, one of 2 things. They can either, you can do this because you have my email, so you can send him my email, but I am just working through, like, if you want any information or details about the class, you should DM me on Twitter. I'm at Liam Garrow, and I can give you all of the details for the class, and then I'll give you days, times, and it's only $60. It's a 3-week course, so it works out to like $20 a class. It's a pretty good deal. And then what happens at the end of the course is you have a month to write your pilot. I will then read it and give detailed feedback. What else do I want to say? Okay, so we've covered Mark Harris.
Did you hear me typing? I literally messaged him as I was like, yo, do you want to know?
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I did it right there.
Yeah, but who cares? We all know that we're at home. No, not like this. You just do it like full, like His Girl Friday, like clack, 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 ding, clack, 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 clack. And then what else? We want people to rate, review, and subscribe to the show.
5 stars, nothing but. Don't be foolish. We couldn't care.
People have been really slack on leaving reviews. I just need people to know that I'm noting that, and I don't appreciate it.
Give it 5 stars, but maybe be like, hey, had trouble with the audio.
We can't.
3 out of 5 stars. That's what the description could be. You could say that, like verbatim. You could just say
here's the thing.
Rate it 5.
You can't leave me open and vulnerable like this. You can't. Why do you seek to destroy me? You're gonna notice my thirst trap. I don't even like it.
Brave, 2 out of 5.
2 out of 5.
Did I not like it? I thought.
DM me.
I saw it on my notifications.
DM me. Listen. DM me on my Twitter and be like, hey, loved your ass. 2 out of 5.
Love that's
you're
a
so
great
brave.
Review. Right?
2 out of 5.
Yeah.
Nothing like an honest review of your body would make me feel so good. I definitely wouldn't develop an eating disorder. Also, advice, if you have a question, DM me on Twitter. I want to help people out. I think I have a real...
Do you have
Listen,
another Dear Abby? Do you have another one to do?
We're gonna do another one.
Okay,
We'll
good.
do another one next week. We'll sort of have those kind of coming on a semi-frequent basis because it is also fun. It's just like fun to get inside someone's head. This week's guest, however, is Jamie Dumont. He's a host of the Invalid podcast, which is all sort of, he has this incredible show that he co-hosts with a friend of his, and they basically speak to like really like New York Broadway legends, and they really dissect New York theater and the Broadway scene. It's really incredible. Jamie Dumont, the fabulous Invalid, and what other things should we get into, except for to say, I think this one last piece of business, which is, and it's only one thing that I have to say.
What is it, Liam?
Adam James Bogey, AJ Bogey, you are the love of my life. You didn't even see it coming. You didn't even see it coming is the thing. LOML, knuckle tats. Knuckle tats. What's also so great for you specifically is you could write LOML on one knuckle and then the other one LIAM.
Yeah.
So perfect.
Yeah. Or I could, if I needed to put like an exclamation mark, I could, the last L on LOML, I could make that the Liam, the LIAM, and maybe put like an exclamation mark too. If I just needed to add another character, I have room for it.
Well, or instead, did you want to just surgically attach another digit to your hand?
Just for a thumbs up, an extra thumb.
That's exactly right. People should follow you on Twitter and Instagram and Clubhouse at AJ Vogie.
Yeah, sure.
People should follow me on Clubhouse and Twitter.
Much? I just hate that our time. I hate that our time zones are so different.
I know.
When I go on, I see that you've gone on like 12 hours ago, 15 hours ago, and I'm like.
And my thing is like, it's the thing where like when I will check in every so often, it's like it is literally when I'm at work, and it's like, oh, this is impossible. But AJ and I will figure out a time to host a room. We keep threatening it. We'll make it happen. Follow me at Liam Garrow on Twitter and Clubhouse. If you want advice, DM me a question. If you want to know about my class, DM me on Twitter. And there's nothing really left to say. I think we should just bulldoze into this chat with Jamie Dumont. AJ, say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Oh my God.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Look how gorgeous your apartment is, Jamie.
Oh, thanks. Well, that's my kitchen, but yeah.
But it's presumably it's in your apartment, Jamie.
It is in my apartment. Yes, I'm home.
You have what is that? Are those lilacs behind you?
They are
lilies?
Casablanca lilies, I believe they're the red stargazer. The stargazer lilies.
Oh my God, they're beautiful.
They smell really good too. I'm very happy about that.
If I'm not, maybe not stargazer, if I'm not mistaken, because you mentioned Casablanca lilies, I think that was Lena Horne's favorite flower.
Like Casablanca?
Yeah.
I think so. That's the big white one.
Yeah,
that
that's
smells
right. That's right.
Really, that was always in her hair. That
Very
smells
fragrant. Yeah.
Yeah, these are fragrant too. I have cats, so anything you can do to, to help with the cat smell.
Well, but how are they around plants? Because some cats really will kind of pot them and try to eat them.
They're okay. So the cats actually, I have a little terrace, and so the cats could go out on the terrace, and there's grass out there for them. So I have it figured out. So they leave my indoor stuff alone.
Oh,
they leave my shit alone.
Wow,
Can I swear?
We're gonna have to end this right now. That's
all right,
just.
sorry.
I'm sorry. Well, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Nice talking to you.
Bye. Wait a minute. So, is it? Because you're talking to a French Canadian here. So, is it Dumont or is it Dumont?
I say Dumont. You could say Dumont if you wanted to. It is a French name. My father's family wasn't French. They were from Luxembourg. Which
were they?
Very few people know about Luxembourg, but
in hearing you say that rings true. That is a piece of like a nugget of information I feel like I heard once 20 years ago and then never thought about again. But I'm like, right, yes.
Yeah. Do you even know where it is?
I mean, Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, of course, you're Canadian, so you're your sense of geography is going to be exponentially better than the average Americans.
How do you figure?
Because don't you teach world geography in your schools?
We do, but you're talking to someone who dropped out of high school midway through grade 9, Jamie. So this could be a real uphill climb, you realize, in terms of any sort of, if you're looking to sort of position me in some sort of social stratus in relation to education. I mean, I am just bottom rung, right?
Well, you're a man after my own heart, because I am somebody who went to several of the finer learning institutions in the Southern California area. So I bounced around from high school. So I think we speak the same language.
Yes. Oh, maybe so. So wait a minute. What prompted all the bouncing around? Your parents must have had a job that precluded you moving.
No, well, we did. We moved. I grew up in Chicago, and we did move to Los Angeles my freshman year of high school. But I got into a bunch of trouble at one school. I ended up going to another school. I ended up not getting asked back to that school, or basically that's the nice way of saying kicked out. So I went to another school. I traveled around a bit.
Jamie, were you a troublemaker?
I was. I was a bit of a handful, as they say in high school.
Oh, I mean, you seem to have really collected yourself. For Christ's sakes, you've got stargazer lilies behind you.
I did. I got my act together.
Wait a minute. So when you say, because it's always fascinating to me. I mean, I'm going to assume it was like fairly serious if, you're getting kicked out of school, because my sister was the kind of kid where it's like, because, sometimes when people say like, well, she was a real troublemaker. And then like, that means like, oh yeah, because, she's like late for curfew. And I'm like, no. Like my definition of getting into trouble is like, well, she forged a check for $6,000 again. Like that was my sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I wasn't forging checks. I wasn't committing larceny, but I was. I ran with a very fast crowd. I partied a lot. I was very. I rejected authority in a great way. So this is a perfect example of what I was like as a young person. I went to a public high school for my first year of high school. It didn't go well. I was then put into a Catholic high school, which I really didn't want to go to.
No.
And so what I did was, my first day of school in the Catholic school, before I got out of the car, my friends dropped me off. My public school friends dropped me off. I took a magic marker and I wrote "fuck you" on my backpack in big letters and put it on my back and walked through the quad. I didn't get 20 steps before one of the, they were Franciscan brothers, before one of the brothers grabbed me by my neck, pulled me into the office and said, "Is this how you want to start your first day of school here, Mr. Dumont?"
And you said, "Abso-fucking-lutely."
I absolutely. I was like, "What's wrong? I don't see the problem." So that was, that's kind of what I was like.
Was it, what sort of prompted that? Because I mean, God, I was like such a goody, like the idea of, and I think some of this has residually spilt over now. I still hate getting into trouble now as an adult.
Yeah.
So what's the fuel in the tank there? Jamie, why were you so angry? Do you like, I lean into the mic. Yeah. Jamie, why were you sad?
I don't know if I was sad. I was pissed off. Yeah. I think I was pissed off. I think I was angry. I think my parents, for better or for worse, weren't terrific parents. I think that they weren't really, by the time I came around, I was much younger. There was a big age gap between me and my older brothers. And I think by the time my parents got around to me, they were just kind of done and they weren't that interested. And so I felt a real need to be like noticed and to get into trouble and to buck authority. And I think that I was just angry a lot of the time. And I think I was also angry, particularly when we moved to California, about being sort of ripped from whatever my world was and thrown into a new world, even though I loved Los Angeles. And I grew up in I went to high school in Los Angeles in the early 80s, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. It was a fantastic experience. But I think at the beginning of it, I was like, not happy and acting out. But, you change, you grow up. I don't behave that way at all. In fact, I agree with you. Now as an adult, I don't live in fear of getting into trouble, I am much more respectful of like authority and following. I love rules. I love guidelines. I love parameters. I've done a real change of
180.
heart.
Yeah, you love the structure now that teenage Jamie completely tried to sort of, push away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How did we get on? Did I bring this up? Did I start this?
Well, you mentioned that you were a troublemaker, and when I find troublemakers, I'm always really, because to me, in some ways, it's a culture shock. Again, I grew up with someone who got into very serious trouble, but for me, it's so counterintuitive just to the way that I'm wired. So that, like, when I kind of meet people who, and then also particularly because now you sit before me, through this computer, a like collected individual with a gorgeous apartment, and I'm like, how did this come to be? Like, I have such an equation where, like, if you really fuck shit up as a teen, that it's really gonna sort of really cause trouble for you the rest of your life. So
yeah, I suppose I think that's true. I think that's a road that you can take, and I think you can also take a path to redemption, if you will. And I was heavily into drugs. I got arrested several times as a child. I then went off to college in San Francisco. And by this point, it was sort of at the end of the Reagan administration and the beginning of the Bush administration.
Yeah.
America went into a war at that time, the Gulf War in the early 90s. And I became very active in protesting. And so it didn't just evaporate immediately, but I think as I got older and, you become an adult. I suppose it could have gone the other way too, right? I could have led a life of crime.
You could be talking to me right now with a ski mask over your face. I mean, well, and I mean, I think also it's interesting you mentioned protesting, because I think there is something to be said for, when you get older, there's a chance that you also just finesse the ability to like channel a little bit better. You know what I mean? So it's like the rage now gets allocated and put over here.
Right.
And then we get to sort of nurture these other qualities about ourselves so that, we can be flourishing members of society, right? And not, totally having feeling the need to like clash every 20 seconds. I'm curious, do you, just because, I mean, America as a whole has always been very interesting to me as a Canadian, and I think particularly when I was younger, I think I kind of actually like, I don't think I romanticized the whole of America, but there were definitely certain places that I was very like, ooh, about. And actually one of them was, LA and Chicago. But is there sort of, or was there, I should say, like a significant enough sort of like culture shock between, the two cities and the two states? Because, there's the trope, at least, I think that, like Chicago is like mild-mannered, well-mannered people, that the Chicagoan accent and all of that, and then LA being potentially a little more rambunctious. Do those stereotypical tropes hold true or not so much?
I think like all stereotypes, they're based in some reality, and then they're also overblown. I will say I had a very thick Chicago accent when I first moved to California, and I was teased mercilessly for it. And so I no longer say things like mom, college, or I try not to.
Well, the Chicagoan accent, by the way, it's so similar to the Canadian accent.
It is.
It's just the vowel pronunciation is, so in like the Chicagoan accent, you guys open the vowel, and then the Canadian accent, we close the vowel. Mm-hmm. So for you guys, it's like mom, car, bar, and then for us, it's mom, bar, car. That's all it is. It's
the exact
very
same
similar.
Thing.
Yeah,
and it's also like it's very similar. Like the Midwestern American accent is also very similar to the upstate New York accent. Like as you get closer to like Buffalo and Rochester and like the top of that state, which is also very close to Canada too. So
right, of course.
It kind of makes sense that they all play along together,
bleed together. So yeah, what was LA like in the early 80s?
It was great. So it was a bit of a culture shock, but it wasn't. We spent a lot of time in Los Angeles growing up. So it was, from as far back as I can remember, we were always going to move to Los Angeles. Chicago was always, and I didn't grow up in the city. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago. And I always knew that at some point we would move there. And I always kind of figured it would be, or I was told, excuse me, that when my brothers graduated high school, and they were like 9 and 10 years older than I was, that would be the right time. Let's get them through school, we would move. And that's exactly what happened. So we moved when I was, I think, 13 or 11, I don't know, whatever it was. I was a preteen. But yeah, it was a culture shock, but it was also fantastic because LA in those days was, there was a lot going on. There was a great music scene. There was a great kind of club scene. And I'm talking about being very young, being in high school and spending a lot of time in Hollywood and West Los Angeles, doing things that probably I shouldn't have been doing as a kid, right? Hanging out with people that were much older, so this is the first concert I ever saw. And it was at the Hollywood Palladium, which is a club on Hollywood Boulevard. And I went to see, my favorite band at the time was called The Clash.
Oh,
and,
yeah, sure.
And so this
that's
is like
so funny. I was just gonna ask if you were part of the punk scene there. That's so funny.
We thought of ourselves more as mods, which of course, you can't be like a middle class white, Los Angeles kid and be part of the mod movement, really, if you know what the mod movement is. But whatever. So this first concert, I think it was 1980 or 81. I can't quite remember. I do know this. It was before the Go-Go's album came out, That Beauty and the Beast, because we went to see The Clash, but the then unknown Go-Go's opened up for the sort of known Bangles, who opened up for the very known English Beat, who were the opening act for The Clash. So we saw all these bands, and I remember, and it was on a school night, I think. It was like on a Tuesday or a Thursday night. So I went to this club, saw this long concert, and then went back to school the next day. And I remember telling my friends that weren't with me that there's this great girl group, and like they're like punk and they're wild. It was the Go-Go's.
Yeah.
And maybe 3 or 4 months later, that Beauty and the Beat album came out. So I'm fuzzy on the dates, but it was like 81, I think, was when that album came
81,
out.
and then yes, and it's funny because also
it was like fall of 81 or something.
Well, and of course, they would have by that point, I think, probably maybe just returned from touring with maybe the Clash, but certainly the Specials in England.
Yeah.
And even though that tour was a real disaster, the lore was like, oh, but they just came back from touring in England. And so then there was like this buzz around them. Because they were like, when I saw them, they were like these kind of slightly new wave punk girls. They seemed messed up. Like they were wild. They were raw. They had this like crazy raw energy. They did not feel like the produced super band that came out in, with that first album. Well, did you watch that documentary?
I've not seen what documentary. I don't know what you're talking about.
So on Showtime, so it debuted last year at Sundance, back when film festivals were a thing, and it then got picked up by Showtime, and it's a documentary basically sort of tracing the whole sort of career formation, of the Go-Go's, and they talk about how, yes, you're right. Prior to the recording, they were an unabashedly very punk band, which I think, a lot of people who aren't overly familiar with them didn't know that foundation was there. And what they sort of realized in recording that record was, because of course, you have A&R people being like, you need a single, so you need to figure something out here. And literally, was it maybe Charlotte Caffey in that documentary who said, like, all we did was we took all the songs we were already doing live and we literally just basically like sped up the time signature.
Yeah.
And then we realized, like, oh my God, we actually wrote pop songs and we didn't even mean to.
Yeah, that sounds.
And that's how they found that sound.
That makes a lot of sense. To be honest with you, I don't remember, and time has a way of conflating memory, but I don't really remember. They certainly didn't have that. What's the big song from that album? We Got the Beat.
We Got the
right?
And Our Lips Are Sealed. Yeah.
Our Lips Are Sealed. I don't think either of those songs were songs that they sang. I do have a memory of This Town. I remember hearing that song, yes. and it was very raw and kind of punk, and they were angry in the sound of singing it. Again, perhaps memory has conflated, has conflated that memory, but I do have a very clear memory of that.
Well,
moment.
I also love how Belinda Carlisle fits into that whole scene, because it's just so funny to me that she was like this punk pop rocker, but also kind of sounded like maybe her voice belonged on like the Annie Broadway cast album.
Yeah, it's
Like,
true.
do you know what I mean? Like, it's all very like, see the people look it. It's all just very like super like forward and in the nose, and like you think she's gonna break out into like Tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And she also has that look, right? Like of all the women, I feel like she also has a very like cheerleader, classic American girl look where like, even with her hair frizzed out and, you know, the bangles and all that sort of new wave look, she still has a very like classic apple pie American look, where the other women are much more sort of like they're much more interesting and defined looking. Right, they don't look like anyone else.
I really romanticize the 80s, and like, because when you talk about like, oh, this every woman or like girl next door quality or that whole thing, like, I also think the 80s is a really interesting time, because I think in a big way it was kind of the last vestige of you not needing to look like a supermodel to become famous. Do you know what I mean? Like, Belinda Carlisle, is she a terribly attractive woman? Of course. I mean, like, beautiful and, you know, cute, but also like looks like a woman you would know. Does that make sense? Right?
Yes.
And
looks like the girl next door.
Right. Exactly right. And now it's like, and I really kind of like, I scratch my head at, it's going to make me sound like I'm 800 years old, but you know, when you look at people who are starting, and I mean, it's not just now, I mean, this isn't a new thing, but like, there's this expectation that you need to look like the most exotically beautiful person in the world, and you need to have like this weird like scream belty voice, and you need to have this like insane gym body, and you need to like, I'm like, wow, there just wasn't that expectation, you know, when I was growing up, when my sister was growing up, when my mom was growing up. Like, it's just so interesting how far that pendulum has swung, where it's like, you don't get to just be good at one thing anymore, and you don't get to like look like a normal person anymore, right? And I think actually, weirdly, in a way, the person that, I don't think she meant to do this, but I think the person that kind of changed the game in a way was Whitney Houston, because it was like, oh my God, no one's seen a person who not only looks like that but then sings like that. And I wonder, I'd be so curious to know if, whether consciously or not, it's sort of changed the paradigm for people in terms of what they felt like they could expect from, you know, their pop stars.
You know, that's a really interesting point. I think you're probably right. I think that Whitney is sort of a very good example of that, because she was so beautiful, and she was so that, I mean, name another voice like Whitney Houston. You can't really do it.
No.
But I do think that it was a combination of a lot of things. I think it was the music industry. I think it was the television industry. I think it was film. I think it was all kinds of things kind of coming together at the same time in terms of what we thought of, like what was marketable, what was beauty. Because I do agree with you. I feel like particularly in the 70s, when you look at like who the big movie stars in America or the world were, they were, you know, you had your Jane Fondas and your Goldie Hawns, but you also had like, you know, Shelley Duvall and Ellen Burstyn and Sissy Spacek, and all of these women are, and we could go through the men too. It's similar down the, you know, like Donald Sutherland or James
Robert De Niro,
Robert De Niro, right? Like Pacino. All of these people, they're all very individual and quirky, and it's not about their beauty as much as it is about the character of who they are, right? And their quirkiness as a person then, you know, it helps kind of identify who they can be as an actor and their talent. But I feel like that, like what you were saying, that sort of ended in the 80s. Those kinds of stars don't exist anymore for the most part, where people are individual and quirky. Now there's this very unrealistic idea of beauty, but also talent, right? Like you can't just be a good actor. You have to be able to sing and dance and market yourself and be on Instagram and, you know, all of those things. It's
and it breaks my heart when you hear about actors not getting, and when I say actors, like, I even mean like, even like regional theater actors in smaller towns, literally not like being able to go out for certain theater gigs because they don't have a prominent enough following on Instagram.
That's
and you're like, are you
me.
out of your goddamn mind? And I also wonder, you know, because because of course, you know, when Reagan was in office, and if memory serves, he did not leave the United States in good footing economically, correct?
Not particularly, no.
And so, but this also kind of coincided with like the nighttime soap, right? And it's like, it's Dallas and it's Dynasty, and it's like affluent, money. And it's like, and it's also like, it's a very sort of affluent, elevated kind of beauty, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting, I think, how that also kind of was the needle moving a little bit, where it's like, no, now people on TV need to like look like this, and you need to like really have everything, you know, pulled back and tied to the back of your skull if you want to make it look like you can be a person who, you know, can be a viable option to look at on television, right?
Yeah, I think, well, I definitely think that the Reagans had a lot to do with that. I think that the Reagans in the White House in the 80s, they exemplified wealth. They exemplified like this sort of false, but not really American dream of like what it's like to succeed. And that is,
and in a way,
that's
celebrity.
money.
Yeah,
and celebrity, right.
Yeah.
And well, look at who Ronald Reagan was. He was an actor,
Mm-hmm.
right? He was an actor who became a politician. And, you know, I think that was relatively new. We hadn't seen that before in terms of somebody who had a fairly successful film career and then pivoted and became, you know, governor of California and then president of the United States. And I'm not a huge fan of President Reagan, but I do admire the ability that he had to seem like a leader, whether or not he was leading on his own accord or he was leading by the advice of others. I think, you know, that's a different conversation. But I definitely think that he presented himself as a leader, and a lot of that had to do with his ability as an actor. And, you know, and I think that swayed people. People really took to that in this country.
I think he was one of the first people, at least, you know, in my memory, who really was the first to kind of finesse performing politically. Like being very mindful of how he was conducting himself in front of people to elicit a certain reaction, you know, and how in relation to his temperament, you know, I think, look, I do not agree with him politically at all, but, you know, when he was speaking in front of people, he seemed very sort of amiable, mild-mannered, controlled, right? And I think, again, I mean, I have no idea how much of that was innate to his own character, but I'm like, I really think,
or how much of it was early onset Alzheimer's.
Oh God. And you just think like, and how much of that is also mindful, like performance of like, right. I know what I need to be doing right now.
Yeah. I think that's what it was. I think he was an actor first and foremost, and he knew how to do that. And I think, you know, because you look at the monstrous things that the Reagan administration did, and then you look at a photo of him or you listen to a speech of him and you're like, oh, he's just like this nice grandfatherly kind of guy. But then the things that were happening behind the scenes were just horrific. And, you know, and it wasn't an administration without corruption. And you have to look at the head of that, right? The fish smells from the head. Not, you know, and I don't know if Reagan personally was corrupt, but he certainly let a lot of corrupt things happen. And
I think he was corrupt.
He certainly, well, I think, I mean, I think he was, but I think that's pretty safe to say. But I guess my point is that like they were two different men, right? And part of that is his ability as an actor to present this like grandfatherly, calming person, and then what was really happening. Yeah,
he finessed maybe that duality of knowing.
That's a good word.
Of knowing kind of who to be in front of which people. And I think, and whether people like it or not, I mean, that does at the very least indicate a certain modicum of political savvy.
Right, I agree.
You know, yeah. Now I'm curious. So, at what point does your interest and love of theater sort of come into your life?
Oh, from a very, very early age. I grew up in a house that was, my parents were very into the arts. My father was a television director, so
was he?
He was. So there was that. But my parents loved the theater. They loved it a lot. And they took me to see the first Broadway show I ever saw was Pippin in I think it was 75. I think it was sort of mid to later in the run. I think it was
with those white gloves just coming through the curtain.
And I had seen, well, they actually took me to Jesus Christ Superstar, but I was so young that apparently my father had to hold me in the lobby the entire time because I was scared. And I don't really remember that. But I remember my father took me to a high school production of Kismet, I think it was, or maybe it was Maine, the local high school, and I was transfixed. But I don't really remember a whole lot about that. But Pippin I have very, very vivid memories of. And I was like 8 years old or something like that. I was like 8 years old. I was 8 or 9. I was pretty young. And I never looked back from that moment. I was so, and I didn't, Pippin there's a lot of stuff in Pippin that a young person isn't going to understand, but it didn't matter. I was obsessed from that moment on. And we listened to a lot of cast albums. A lot of the music that we listened to.
Can you remember what it was sort of that transfixed you? Like, 'cause funnily enough, I feel like the first play that I remember seeing, and I think it was the first play I saw, it was in Ottawa, and that's where I grew up. And it was at the National Arts Center, and it's a Canadian play, which I think actually has been done in New York. It's called The Drawer Boy. Does that ring any bells for you?
Doesn't ring any bells.
The premise is this sort of city slicker kid goes to stay with this, elderly sort of male duo who are friends, and they're retired and were former, basically, they fought the war together. And now they're manning this farm, and basically this, young kid that's staying with them, and he's directing this movie about farm life, and so he takes it upon himself to basically, really live this experience and try and, learn from these men about farm life. And of course, that's the sort of, that is the central device for the play. But of course, it really starts to get into the nitty gritty of, what was war like and what memories have been suppressed, and all that comes to the surface. But I remember, one of the characters, one of the older men, is really not at all taken by this younger guy staying with him, and he gets really annoyed by him. And the sort of younger character that has come to stay with them asks something to the effect of like, because he's like wanting to discern every little thing he can about farm life. And I think the question he asks is like, and what is the most delicious, most edible part of the cow? And then this really crusty old guy just looks at him and says, the spleen, which of course is like the inedible part of the animal, which I found out later. But I had no idea what that joke meant. I had no idea why it was funny, but I just remember, hundreds upon hundreds, if not, 1,000 other people laughing at the same time at one thing. And I remember being 7 going like, woo, what's that? Oh, that's really interesting. Can you remember sitting in Pippin, and do you recall a moment that sort of stuck out to you as being the thing that kind of really was the pull?
Well, yes, I do. I remember vividly sitting in the theater, and I think we were in the front row of the mezzanine, and the lights were on, and I'm looking around, waiting for it to start, and all of a sudden, the lights go out, and the orchestra starts with that note right before they come out with the gloves and the white hands. Mm-hmm. There's that note, and I remember getting a thrill, like a shock through my entire body of like, oh, what's going to happen next? And then of course the gloves come out, and it's a sort of an optical illusion, so to speak. And for a young boy, I'd never seen anything like it. And to this day, and I see a lot of theater, as you probably know, that I have my whole life long. And to this day, when the lights dim in the house, I get that same shock. It happens every time. I never, even if I'm checking my phone or stressed or working up until the very last second before the show starts or whatever I'm doing, the minute those lights go out, I get that same thrill that I got in 1975. It's never left me. And I think no matter what happens on the stage, it's always worth it. I very rarely have a terrible time in the theater. I can almost always find something that I like. about what I'm seeing, even if it's something terrible. But that moment of the lights going out, it will never cease to amaze me and thrill me.
They just announced today that they're going to announce the Tony Awards next Thursday in a week's time. So it's October 8th today. So on the 15th, they're going to be announcing. Can I assume that you sort of saw a great deal of what was available to you to see for the last year's theater season?
I did. I do try to see almost everything, and that's not always possible. I certainly see everything that's nominated once that happens. But I did see a fair amount of I think what did actually open last season. We're talking about last season before the shutdown. Like I was fortunate enough to be at the first preview of Company, so I got to see Company, which I was very happy to have seen. I did not see Virginia Woolf. I actually was invited to go to the dress rehearsal or the first preview of that, and I opted out because I thought I'll give him a few weeks. I want to make sure that, of course. Because again, that's a big, like, I love Virginia Woolf. I will see almost any production of it, but it's a big buy-in, right? It's 3+ hours, it's 3 acts. So like, I knew I wasn't going to want to see that multiple times. And so I wanted to make sure that the time I did see it, that it was, it was as good as it could be. So that's a regret I have.
Well, are there things that sort of, that have really stuck out to you from the last theater scene? Like, do you have any special feelings about, shows that you think are going to get nominated?
Well, I think the other thing I'm sad is that I did not see Tina, because I was waiting. I usually reserve a show or two to see during the lead up to the Tony Awards, because I find that in that moment, once shows get nominated, the energy really shifts. And so I waited. I wanted to see Adrienne Warren once she got her nomination. And plus, I think she was sort of out for a little while. So there was a time where I could have seen it where I think she wasn't in it. Yeah, I think she was out. I could be wrong about that, but that's what my memory says. But I particularly waited on that one because I wanted to see it like the week of the Tony Awards, because there's always a great energy in the theaters.
And you're kind of in your glow. There's like that, it's like, I'm nominated, no one's won or lost yet, and isn't this exciting?
Yeah, and there's something I love. One of my favorite performances of the year is the Saturday night before the Tony Awards. And I always choose a specific, I'm always very careful about what show I choose. Excuse me. I'm always very particular about what show I choose, because every show has a very unique energy on that Saturday night. And so I always that's always something that I try very carefully. And I probably would have seen Tina that night.
Yeah. I don't know how.
Oh no, I'm lying. I was going to see Company. I stand corrected. I was going to see Company.
I have no idea how Adrienne Warren sings like that 8 times a week.
I don't know, or dances, from what I gather. Again, I didn't see it, but I hear that final moment at the end is just incredible.
Yeah. Do you have any feelings about, which shows might get nominated?
Well, yeah, I think Tina will get nominated. I mean, the problem is there's such a small pool from which to nominate.
Kidding. Yeah.
That there could even be some categories that are admitted because they don't have enough nominees, and it's been a while since that's happened. But I think Moulin Rouge will do very well. I think Company and West Side Story are both excluded, which is unfortunate because I think they would have done very well.
Right, because they never really got the runs up and running, as it were. Yeah,
and I think what I think is really interesting is that I think this will be very good for slave play. I think it could be very good for The Inheritance. I think that The Inheritance had a certain amount of backlash to it. There was a lot of criticism around it. I'm not one of those people. I actually really love The Inheritance. I think it's a really beautiful and fascinating piece of theater. I also understand some of the criticism. I think some of it is unfounded.
Well, you're talking to someone who's not privy to that, so can you shed some light on
okay.
What was the criticism?
So The Inheritance is a play by Matthew Lopez. It's a 6.5 hour piece of theater that's broken up into 2 parts, and it basically is a retelling of the Howard Zinn story, but told told in today's time, but through the gay experience. So the Schlegel sisters become a gay couple, and so on and so forth. And and there was a lot of criticism around it from basically from well, there was a lot of criticism around it that it was very white, and that it told a very one-sided story, that it told sort of a white gay privileged experience, which is not untrue. But I think what's interesting about the play is that it's written by Matthew Lopez, who's a Puerto Rican American playwright. He's also gay. And what he said, he actually, we had him on our show and we talked about this very thing with him. And he said, look, this is the play that I chose to write. This is my experience of this experience. And there are other experiences that I'm not going to write about, that I could or could not write about. And I thought that was really interesting that he, you know, his defense was that this is what he chose, the story he chose to tell, and somebody else can tell their story or the story that they choose to tell. My whole point in saying all of this is that I think had the world not shut down and had we been in a different position in June of this year, I think that the Inheritance might have had a little more trouble at the awards because of the fact that there was still a lot of, there was still some heat on it. It was still very close to the flame. Now that we've had some time, it'll be interesting to see if they do a little bit better or if they're shut out. I think that slave play could also do very well because, again, there are plays that didn't get to open. You know, Virginia Woolf, and I'm also talking kind of in the actor category too, where they, where the actor categories are where revival and new plays kind of cross over. So we'll see.
Just to speak quickly to Matthew Lopez's point, there is an interesting thing that I think there are two things at play there, because it is an interesting conundrum, I think, that people who are politically otherized face when they write stories, which is, I think there's this sense that we are needing to, in some way, because we have this sort of moment of visibility, we need to sort of showcase everybody equally all the time. Which of course isn't possible because to make reference to what Matthew Lopez says, he's like, well, but this is the story that I sort of was witness to. And this is sort of, this is the way in which I feel like I was authentically able to tell it. So there is that side of the coin. But then on the flip side of it, there is, I think, a very valid criticism. And I certainly not just with The Inheritance, but, I think writ large, when you look at sort of gay representation in film, TV, and screen, film, television, and stage rather, it does really skew very white. And, it's, and hopefully the gatekeepers for that are either changing and or becoming a little more, just progressive and savvy about, the kind of shows they're putting up on the stage. Because, hopefully for queer writers, content creators, what have you, who are interested in sort of showcasing a more diverse spectrum of characters, they can sort of have as equal an opportunity, right? But, not to diminish, of course, like, Matthew Lopez is a, as you say, Puerto Rican out gay male. And so, that's no small potatoes for him to have this, Broadway play under his belt and then also quite likely get nominated for a Tony.
Right, and on the short list for the Pulitzer, which he did not win. Look, I couldn't agree with you more. I think particularly representation on all fronts needs a lot of work. There's a lot to be done. And I do think that with the criticism of The Inheritance, a lot of it was also in the casting, that it was a very white cast.
Right.
Like if you have 3 or 4 lead male characters and they're all white, then you've not done a good job, right? You've not listened to the world around you. And that's a very fair and accurate criticism. I think what I just thought was interesting was Matthew's sort of rebuttal to the play that he wrote, which are different arguments, right? And I think one of the things The Inheritance could have done better is in their casting, right? Perhaps they could have had a more diverse cast. That's not to say they did have a diverse cast, but where their leads were concerned, it was very white, and I think that's a big part of the argument that people had with it. But that doesn't actually speak to the piece itself, to the integrity of the writing.
Well, and I think actually Broadway sort of has really been ahead of the curve, again, particularly as it relates to film and TV, of like, you know, colorblind casting, and, you know, you see way more diversity on stages. And, you know, there's not a second thought about whether, you know, particularly if a gay actor plays straight or vice versa. Like, I feel like that world, again, from my very sort of distant point of view of it, seems far more malleable and fluid.
Oh, I agree with you. I think Broadway and theater, right? Broadway is not the end all be all of theater. Theater is everywhere, and theater is I think theater in general, but speaking about Broadway, has, as you said, been way ahead of the curve in terms of, and I love this. David Henry Wong, the playwright, calls it color conscious casting, which I think is really, really a good way to say it. But colorblind, whatever you want to call it.
No, color conscience is great.
I think it's great, but I do think that even Broadway has work to do, and I think that is getting done, and I think that real change can happen in theater faster in many ways than it can anywhere else. And that's fantastic. And let's just hope that it keeps moving forward.
Well, wait a minute. In the vein of progress, now look, did you watch that vice presidential debate last night?
Oh, did I ever?
Yeah.
Tell
me everything.
Well, okay. I thought it was fantastic. I thought that Kamala Harris did an incredible job, and I think she had a very tough road ahead of her. I mean, I think she had a tough assignment, and I think she handled it beautifully. And I will say, as an American citizen who has felt crushed by the last 4 years of the Trump administration, and who has struggled to find hope and pride in their country, last night was a real moment of feeling that. Last night, Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, showed the American people what leadership is like. And she showed the American people what a future with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as president and vice president would look like. Unfortunately, with the presidential debate, Vice President Biden wasn't really given that opportunity because he was just like deling with a maniac screaming at him and interrupting him. So
it's a baby with dementia.
Absolutely, it's a very good way to put it. And so I feel like the presidential debate was just soul crushing and hard to watch. And I think that Vice President Biden, when he was able to make his point and look at the camera and speak to the American people, it was beautiful. But unfortunately, what we take away from that was just the shit show that it was. And last night was very, very different because Kamala was able to get her point across, and they both did. I will say, I think Vice President Pence is a monster, but he had his message and he got it through. He had his talking points, and he was able to give them, as vile and hateful and not truthful either, I might add. Senator Harris really was spectacular, and that's tough, right? I mean, she's a woman and she's a Black woman. And so the rules are different for her. And she has to work 8 times, 10 times, 20 times harder to prove herself, which is just it's so crazy to me. And she did it, and she did it with grace and dignity and leadership. And it was brilliant. I loved it. I feel very hopeful today.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think CNN then just released the graphic of sort of how much talking time they were allotted. And I think Kamala Harris was only like 10 seconds or so shy of Mike Pence's talking time. And I can't remember who it was, but the person who basically showed the graphic very astutely pointed out, like, yes, they had almost exact equal time, but remember, Kamala Harris had to fight for her time.
Right. She did. She had to fight very hard. And again, I don't want to sell the moderator down the river, because I think she did a much better job than Chris Wallace did. And I'm a big fan of Chris Wallace. He had a terrible, terrible assignment with that. But I feel like Susan Collins, I believe is her name. I feel like at a certain point, she needed to stop thanking Vice President Pence, right? He was not behaving. He was not following the rules. And yet she kept saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was her way of interrupting him. And it just felt like it was giving him permission to continue to behave badly.
No, you need someone from Boston to moderate that debate.
Yeah.
Be like, and if I could even like, you need like a woman in her 60s from Boston. And you just need her, and then it's just like, all right, you're done.
Yeah.
Enough.
You do a good Boston accent.
Do you know, well, because do you know who I'm ripping off? Wait a minute. Do you know about the podcast? Wait, do you know about the character Ronna Glickman?
Does she do a podcast with Brian Safi?
Yes, Ask Ronna.
Yes.
This is the one.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'm ripping off her voice is exactly what I'm doing.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Is it a good? I love Brian Safi, but I haven't listened to this one. Is it? He has like 400 podcasts.
I know. It's excellent because it's funny, but also Jessica Chaffin as Ronna Glickman does have this actual, I think, kind of otherworldly ability to synthesize information. So the general device of the podcast is that it's an advice podcast and people are wanting to know sort of Ronna's wisdoms about certain things. So here's the thing. It's funny, but it is also incredible advice.
I didn't realize it was Jessica Chaffin.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I love her.
Yeah, she's terrific. And actually, someone just wrote in who had mentioned that they're a listener. I love that we're also like promoting another podcast that we have zero affiliation with. But a listener wrote in and said, I just want you to know, like, I'm actually a licensed psychologist, and you are giving very sensitive and thoughtful and appropriate information here.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, isn't that incredible? Yeah. So so that's kind of my default Boston accent, but I can't speak that way for more than 10 seconds because then I immediately feel a catch in my throat, and I just, because it's all speaking on like a really rough grain. She has a really sort of raspy voice, and then by the end you feel like your entire vocal cords are about to shut down.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I will check. It's on the list. It's hard, there's not enough. It's funny. We live in a pandemic, and certainly America is shut down for the most part to a certain extent. And yet there isn't enough time to do all the things you think when you can't go anywhere.
Well, but
there
also,
would be plenty of time.
But the reality is this. Let's say you, Jamie, truly had every single second open and available to you to kind of do nothing. Let's say that was your life. There's also something to be said for your brain kind of tapping out and going like, okay,
yeah,
I can't have an intake of anything else right now.
Right.
I gotta tap out.
And also I think because of the way the world is now, and that we have to communicate via our computers and our cell phones and with headphones on and all those things, I think that like without having interpersonal connections, without being able to just like sit down and have a conversation with somebody at your leisure outside or wherever, I think that we do have a little bit of fatigue in terms of, having our headphones on, being in front of a computer, because I'm in front of a computer way more than I was before, which was a lot. And so I think that you have more of a need, kind of what you were saying, to just shut down, close the computer, sit in a room, I have more silence now. I really require a fair amount of time in my life where I don't play music, where I just listen to nothing. I just have silence, even if I'm doing, busy work or, making the bed or whatever it is. And it's brilliant. It's beautiful. I really love the silence.
Well, and if you kind of think of your brain as a computer, it's like the computer needs to be rebooted. You need to recharge. And I remember I read something, actually, this was years ago on Twitter, but someone basically had written, because there's sometimes for certain people there can be this sense of guilt when they unplug a little bit, because they think, well, I'm making a choice now to be uninformed and I don't know what's going on, and and also kind of, oh well, like this privilege that I have to be able to unplug. And this woman actually just said, we're talking about therapy, she goes, I just want you to know, to whomever reads this, and if this is helpful to you at all, I spoke to my therapist about this, and my therapist has said, the human brain is not meant to process trauma at the rate at which it currently is. Right?
Yes, makes so much sense.
So there comes a point where, you know, you can only read so much before you kind of need to say like, and you know, when to unplug doesn't mean to tune out, but it does mean like maybe for an hour, I am just going to go walk outside.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know what? I don't look at the phone before I go to bed. And maybe the phone actually doesn't make it with me into the bedroom. Maybe that's my rule.
Right. Leave the
You know?
phone outside for the night.
Yeah.
Not outside, but outside the bedroom. Leave it in a different room.
Throw it outside of your terrace window.
Right.
And if you are meant to use that phone again, it will be on your front step tomorrow. And if not, live and let God. Live and let God. What are things that you're leaning on during, you know, quarantine as sort of your things getting you through?
Well, this is the thing that I find so fascinating about quarantine. I have almost no ability to take in like new media. So
oh my God, same.
In other words, I can't, I rented a new film on the television, and it was a 90-minute film, and it took me almost 3 hours to get through it because I kept pausing it because I couldn't focus on it. So what I find just in terms of like recharging and like watching, I'm revisiting old movies,
leaning on the classics,
old TV shows that I want to, for whatever reason, I want to revisit. And I will say there was a particularly horrible Saturday after Justice Ruth Ginsburg passed away. Yeah. And I spent I couldn't get out of bed. And I had trouble getting out of bed. And I spent most of the day watching Mary Tyler Moore reruns. And it felt so good. I love the Mary Tyler Moore show. I grew up on that show. I don't watch it. I haven't watched it in years. But I just put it on mid-third season or fourth season or whatever it was on Hulu or whatever it is on. And it just felt like a recharge. So that's what I'm leaning on, old movies and old TV.
Because it's all comfort food. It's the same thing of like, why do people, you know, like I don't know if you're this way, but sometimes I will even like, if I'm cooking, if I'm doing odd jobs around the apartment, blah, 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 I will put on a television show or a movie or, you know, an album that I've listened to or watched ad nauseum. And because I'm working on other stuff, I'm not really especially paying attention to it, but it's also the sound of it is comforting because what I'm actually hearing in the background, it's like the sound of something that works.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Something that's going well.
Yes. And I'm like, that is what I want to be focusing on right now. And like, or like that's, I need that thing to sort of be scoring whatever else that's happening right now. So for me, it's like, yeah, I right now am totally leaning on like podcasts. I'm leaning on Linda Ronstadt as much now as I ever have before.
We share that in common.
Oh my God. Well, look, I would say one of the few, I mean, it's new-ish now, but because, you know, they basically dug up. They found these masters of this live show that she recorded in 1980. Right. And so then they released a live album of it. Ugh.
Yeah. There's nothing quite like Linda Ronstadt's voice.
Are you also a huge fan?
Oh, huge fan. Oh, huge. In fact, such a huge fan. I have a friend who lives in San Francisco who lives around the corner from her. And every time I go to visit him, I'm like, okay, we need to walk by her house. You need to point it out to me again. Maybe we'll see her. He's like, he says that she's, you know, he lives in San Francisco, but he lives in a sort of suburban part of the city. Yes, he lives in Seacliff, and it's families and whatnot. And he said on Halloween, she's out there, you know, with a witch hat on, passing out candy. She's very plugged into the community, which I love. But yes, I'm a huge fan of her music. I think I do mean this when I say that her voice is, it's perfection. It really is.
Well, Glenn Frey, before he passed away, you know, when Linda Ronstadt very sadly sort of announced that she wasn't able to sing anymore as a result of her Parkinson's diagnosis, he said this, and I thought it was so perfect. He said, her inability to sing truly is a silencing of one of the greatest instruments of the last half of the 20th century. And I thought he was so on the money with that.
I absolutely. And I think that instrument is such a good way to put it because she sings pop, she sings rock, she sings show tunes. She sings big band. She sings
Mexican,
Spanish songs.
she
She
sings
sings Mexican songs. She
operetta.
sings everything. Like, that is a voice that can really transcend any music, and and there are very few people that can do that. I mean, name another singer with that versatility. I can't actually think of anyone.
Well, and it's a very specific criterion, because when you talk about versatility, but it's also like, not only because I think there are plenty of people who like sing a bunch of different genres, but when you talk about being able to preserve your own voice while still authentically plugging into a sound,
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
I do.
Like,
That's perfect.
yeah, it's like for I don't know, like, I think who's an example of someone who sings a bunch of different kind of genres? Like, I think Bette Midler does that with, varying degrees of success. Still not as like big and sort of a range, but like when you talk about someone who can really nail a rock and roll song and do like a Broadway ballad, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
But
that's fair.
but it's also, but like, or, but I mean, but it's not the same. It's
No.
not the same.
No, she's singular. She is really singular.
It is. Talking about comforts, one of the things, I literally listened to it last night, and I think you and I actually had some back and forth on this about this on Twitter. There's a clip of her, it's 1977. By the way, still 3 years before she said she actually learned how to sing, which is very funny to me. Because that's her whole thing. She hates her voice. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did know that. Yes,
It's
which again just proves her genius, right? Because I think the reason she hates her voice is that she's such a perfectionist, right? Like, it's never.
Yeah. It's when your ability never meets your taste. So if you have really elevated high taste, it's always in your head, you're always falling short, right? But I will always go back to this clip. It's 1977. She's singing Desperado. And when she belts out the last, like, Let Somebody Love You, and she basically jumps the octave, but she does it without going to head voice, and she sustains the belt. I'm like, oh, what?
Yes. We have talked about this because that is unequivocally my favorite. It's possibly one of my favorite recordings of all time.
Yeah.
But it is without question my favorite recording of hers.
Yeah.
Hands down. Now,
I want to talk to you about your podcast, because you have this really terrific podcast that you break down called The Fabulous Invalid, and you co-host it with, now is it Jennifer, is it it also a French last name she has?
Simard. I'm not Simard. No, she says Simard. I don't know if it's French. I don't know what her family heritage is, but it's Jennifer Simard and Rob Russo are my podcast co-hosts.
And break down, what do you all tackle on The Fabulous Invalid?
Well, we are a theater podcast. We typically do interviews with people that work in the theater community. We try to talk to a wide range of people. So we've spoken with everyone from like Betty Buckley and Joel Grey and Donna Murphy and people that are well established in the theater community, and newer people like Ashley Park and Bonnie Milligan and Jacob Dickey, who are sort of younger rising stars. But we also talk to people that work in the theater community that aren't actors. So we've spoken with casting director Tara Rubin. We've spoken with longtime theater photographer Joan Marcus. We've spoken with designers like David Rockwell, choreographers like Camille Brown and Warren Carlisle. You name it. We've done some in-depth sort of deep dives into the Schubert organization, and we spoke with the head of the Schubert archive, which was really fascinating, and we got to take a tour of that archive, which was a lot of fun. And then occasionally we'll do things where we'll really deep dive into the career of Bob Fosse and Gwen Verdon,
Mm-hmm.
or Rob and I ended the second season with a excuse me, a five-part if you can, series on flops and hits. So we broke down what we designated as the greatest flops of the musical theater world and the greatest hits. So that's the show in a nutshell.
Do you have a personal feeling about who you think sort of like has like a place really in the corner of your heart within the theater community? Like, is there an actor or a writer who you have such a soft spot for, who you just sort of love unabashedly?
Oh, just in general, or people that we've spoken to?
Well, it could be either or, but if it was a person you hadn't spoken to, I wouldn't want to discount them. So just anyone.
Well, I would say that I have my heart has a very soft and warm spot for Betty Buckley and for Donna Murphy. I think they're two of the most interesting actors ever to work in the theater. I think they're both very different. I think they approach their work very differently. But I think that they similarly, I'm drawn to them because everything they do, they approach with their own personal intelligence, their own integrity, their own heart, their own warmth, and then they're able to create these incredibly different characters in everything that they do. They've never sort of repeated themselves in their career ever. And I admire that as a fan. But then I've also had the great pleasure of getting to know them slightly from having them on the show and, you know, just being in the theater community. And they're also incredible people. And so I would say that I have a soft spot for them. Joel Grey, I full disclosure, my husband has represented Joel Grey for about 20 years. So I consider Joel an actual friend and sort of part of our family.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that man. He is somebody who has dedicated his entire life to performing and to the arts and to theater. And he is, again, talk about a singular talent. There's nobody quite like Joel Grey. And I think that's also something that I love about the theater is that we have these actors and this incredible talent that you'd only find in the theater. No, there's no place else in the world really for Carol Channing or for a Joel Grey.
Correct.
Right? Like these, Mary Martin to a certain extent, Ethel Merman, Patti LuPone, even though Patti LuPone has done film and television, all of them have done film and television,
yes.
and they've all had success in other mediums. But theater is where these people belong, and it's where they come alive. And
Betty Buckley, just to talk about her for a little bit, also especially within, I would say, the whole sort of like Broadway oeuvre, such an interesting voice.
Oh, so, and you know, it's funny, not only is her singing voice perfection and unique and so interesting, but her speaking voice. Mm-hmm. You know, listen to my interview we've had her on the show twice. Listen to our interview with her. Just her diction and the way she phrases things and the way she speaks is so elegant and artful and like it's so extraordinary to me. I could listen to her read the phone book, and just the way she phrases things is so unique and so intelligent and so unlike any other creature on the planet.
But when you also talk about like the singularity of like what a place like the theater community can sort of who they can attract, right? When you talk about these sort of singular personalities, like, isn't it great that, you know, a voice like Betty Buckley's, in a way, actually, like, there are things that make it a very quintessential Broadway voice, right? She can belt like crazy. She has like a very big range and all of that. But if you even look at like the tone of her voice, I mean, like, I think Betty Buckley could have also totally been like a country singer.
Oh, well, she has sung some country.
Well, so, then there you go.
Yeah.
Like, do you know who I think actually like if this person that I'm about to name was a Broadway singer, I think it would sound like Betty Buckley. Like, I weirdly think she almost has like a very Emmylou Harris sound. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. And also, speaking of Linda Ronstadt and Trio, another one of the great all-time albums is Trio with Emmylou and Linda Ronstadt and Dolly Parton. Oh, that's a fabulous album.
I think it's actually a perfect record. I think it's actually a perfect record. Yeah,
I agree with that. And it's also one of those records that you can put on when, no matter what your mental state is, and it'll just make you feel better, and it'll make you calmer, and it'll make you appreciate that, like, there beautiful things are in the world. But I agree with you. I think I actually think Emmylou Harris could have easily had a career in the theater, and I don't know if she can act, but certainly she could sing.
And I'm sure she could write. I'm sure she can, write for, you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely. Write musical, like write show tunes or write scores.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
it's
agree.
like, yeah, Betty Buckley and Emmylou Harris, I think their voices sound like cracked crystal. It's
Yeah.
so like there's something sort of like so pure about it, but then like there's like this break that they have in their voice that it's like it's almost like this sort of actually, Linda Ronstadt said about Emmylou Harris's singing voice, she says her singing is like someone's head is on the guillotine and it's their last desperate plea for their life. And they save themselves because that's how incredible the voice is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Betty Buckley told us on our show that when she discovered that she had the voice that she has, that she would find herself going into places where she could try out her range. And I'm paraphrasing
Mm-hmm.
her story, but she would find herself going into theaters or churches or even under culverts of the road, where there's the arched,
Yes.
where there's an arched kind of roof for her to, belt out and hear the sound bounce off and develop her voice. And she even said that when she came to New York for the first time, and I think if she wasn't a teenager, she was, in her very, late teens or early 20s. And she snuck into Carnegie Hall because she wanted to hear what her voice would sound like in that great hall.
Oh.
And yeah, of course, we don't live in a world where you can sneak into Carnegie Hall anymore. But I love that story because, again, that to me is what I love about the artistry of Betty Buckley, which is she's always, from the beginning to today, she's always challenging herself and she's always pushing her limits and seeing what she can do. And I just think I love that.
Well, as you and I are going to wind down with this interview, I do sort of cap it off with this one question, which is how I kind of like to top things off. But before we get into that, let people know what are evergreen things of yours. So you of course have your podcast. What are other things that you want to let people know about? You have the Fabulous Invalid podcast. You are at Jamie Dumont on Twitter.
I am. I'm Jamie Dumont, JamieDumont. I will say, before the pandemic, I was not a big Twitter person at all. I kind of resented it. I sort of did it because I have the podcast and I felt I needed to. And then when the shutdown happened and Twitter became a really good way to communicate, it's sort of how we met each other, right?
No question.
It was
Jamie, I joined Twitter in May for Pete's sake.
Oh, see? So
yeah.
Same. Oh, I didn't realize you were new to. I joined Twitter maybe a decade ago, but I maybe tweeted once a year, twice a year, and now I'm on it constantly, and I love it now. And it was a hard road to get there, but I find I actually really love I love the medium. Yeah, I have my podcast, The Fabulous Invalid. You can listen to us on iTunes or the Broadway Podcast Network, or you can go to thefabulousinvalid.com. I always do want to say that people often say, what does The Fabulous Invalid mean? And so I feel I should tell everyone. The Fabulous Invalid was a play by Kaufman and Hart in the 30s. It was about a theater couple who die in the theater opening night, and then for the next 2 acts of the play, they haunt the theater. And what the term became was a sort of a nickname for Broadway. The Fabulous Invalid, referring to the fact that Broadway is always in decline and always bouncing back. Mm-hmm. So it's this secular thing, which couldn't be more appropriate for the world we live in right now.
By the way, I really firmly believe that, look, the reality is that theater, unfortunately, is going to be one of the last things to come back.
Right.
Unfortunately, you really do need to cram bodies into a theater. Forgetting even sort of energetically what the feeling of that sort of provides for a show, but even monetarily, like, unfortunately, this is how theater survives. But I think when theater is back up and running, and I don't just mean Broadway, I mean theater everywhere, I think there is going to be a theater boom like we maybe have not really ever seen before.
I think that's fair to say, and I think you're right. And I think I don't think it'll be immediate. I think there will be some growing pains in terms of figuring out what the road back looks like. But I do agree with you. In fact, Rob Russo, my producing partner on the podcast, and I also have formed a production company. And so we're developing theater, we're developing works. And we talk about that a lot in terms of what are the projects. We've optioned a script, and we have a couple of other things that we're working on. But we talk about exactly that same thing. Liam, that you said, which is when theater comes back, there's going to be there's going to be two audiences, right? There's going to be the tourist audience that always exists, but then there's going to be an audience that's craving things that are familiar to them, but also that they're going to want things that they've never seen before. They're going to want to see some change, not only in the art, but in the way that we cast things, in the way that we produce things, and in the way that we present things. So I think you're right. I think there will be a huge boom, and I think we're going to see a shift in theater that we've never seen before in terms of the types of things that get produced and the way in which we produce them and present them.
But that thing that you talked about, one of the things that still lingers for you as being one of the reasons why you love theater, you know, that feeling as the lights go down and that, you know, that kind of rush you get. I think people are also going to be chasing that. I think people are like, the thing I think that people that is going to sort of be sending people out in droves is because they miss the feeling of that experience.
I agree.
I just think because it's funny, you know, I even remember when restaurants kind of started like lightly opening up a little bit, I was like, oh my God, there's no way people are going to go to restaurants. People are all going to be too paranoid. People are going to be blah, blah, blah. And then sure enough, it's like, and again, you know, pros and cons to this. And then, you know, people go in droves, right? And, you know, are filling up patios and blah, blah, blah. But then it does send the message of like, you know, particularly in, you know, first world country like Canada and the United States, when you have people who go without and when they're told that they can then have, they're like, gimme it. Then gimme it.
Well, we're also human beings are not meant to isolate.
No question. We're social
animals. We're social animals, but we're meant to be together. We're meant to touch. We're meant to hug. We're meant to feel each other, both physically and emotionally. And and I agree with you. And I think also where theater is concerned, there is nothing like a live orchestra. There is nothing like a live performance. There's nothing like when things go beautifully and it's seamless, or when things don't go so well and you get to see that unique experience for that one time. So and I think we crave that. I think you can't reproduce that anywhere else but in a theater.
I think the reason why, you know, theater always has a certain kind of magic over film is because you can't beat the magic of a bunch of breathing bodies in the same room.
Right. Well, and also film, and I love film, don't get me wrong, but film guides you through the experience. And theater does too, but you are more in charge of your experience as a theater goer, right? Mm-hmm. You get to choose where you look. There's no camera that's guiding you through.
Right. If anything, it's all in a wide shot.
Right, right. And then you get to focus on what you focus on. And, you know, look, I'm the kind of person that if I like something, I see things multiple times. I'm not shy about admitting that. And one of the reasons that I like that so much is that you get so much from each experience, because I'm watching a show like The Prom has been on my mind because there's so much talk about this film version.
Movie,
and so I was a big fan of The Prom. I think it's a fantastic musical, just fun and lighthearted and also serious. Mm-hmm. And I saw it multiple times. And one of the reasons that I did is that each time I would, this time I'm going to focus on this journey or that journey. And it was a different experience each time.
You get
and theater always allows that.
Yeah.
Right.
You get
no matter what you're seeing.
Super denser experience for a show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the last question I have for you is, and it could be theater related, but it doesn't need to be, but just, you know, in the interest of sort of going out on a nice light note, I like to ask people just, Jamie, could you share with us, myself and the listening audience, a happy memory?
Oh. Well, the happiest memory I have right now is last night watching the debate and watching
delicious.
and not only watching true leadership in Senator Harris, but also that feeling of hope and pride to be an American. And like I said before, I haven't felt that way in a long time. And that feels good. You want to be proud of your country. You want to be proud of where you live and the people that you live with. And that's been a tough road the last 4 years in America, or certainly for this American. And last night was the first real glimmer of, oh yes, we can get back to what feels more normal to me, and we can have true leadership. And, it's hard living in a pandemic. As you know, you're living in it. Everyone listening is living or has lived through some version of this pandemic. And it's tough. And sometimes you forget that there are good things in the world, like theater, like music. And it was a nice reminder. And I'm going to carry that with me, hopefully for several days to come, because it's hard to watch the news right now. And
yeah, well, and the election is a month away, and look, I recognize that, as a Canadian, my feeling, I'm sure, doesn't even come close to even beginning to parallel the feeling of sort of, anticipation you have. But I mean, I am so hoping and I'm so, also ready for a, change in administration. I am so hoping that things go the way that not only you, but I think like the world at large needs it to go.
I agree. I think we all have fatigue, right? Yeah. We have fatigue from this pandemic as a world. I think the world has fatigue watching our current president just be a monster. And I think that we're all ready for things to calm down on every level. And I hope that it happens, because I don't know what happens if it doesn't.
I will smuggle you and your husband to Vancouver.
Perfect. Well, I love Canada. I've never been to Vancouver. I hear it is exceptional.
I've lived in Canada my whole life. Didn't go to Vancouver. For the first time I went was only just in October. So there you go.
And now you're a resident.
And now I'm a resident. So win me over.
I almost, and then I'll be quiet and I'll leave. But I came very close to living in Ottawa. I was going to do a year at university in Ottawa, and at this point in my college career, I was very interested in politics, and I had it all set up, and I was going to do it, and then I ended up backing out at the last minute because I was afraid to move I was afraid to move to Canada. I can't explain why.
I'm so glad you didn't move to Ottawa, and I'm going to tell you why.
Why?
Because here's how I describe Ottawa. It's the cleanest city where everything closes early.
Yeah.
It's like you're like, oh, you know what? The streets aren't, too dirty, but oh God, I'd love to grab a drink. Oh, it's 8:00 and the bars are closed. Well, all right.
Well, I ended up moving to San Francisco, which is the opposite of clean
Perfect.
And closing early.
But I think, that might be that maybe at that moment in your life would have been more your pace.
Yeah, definitely more my pace.
It was, I have to tell you, because you and I haven't properly spoken before. This was our first time speaking. It is a true delight and joy to be able to properly talk to you.
Thank you. I feel the same way. We should do this where we're not recording it. We should do another Zoom where we actually just where there's no pressure of the microphone.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we can just sort of and listen and wear pants or not.
Yeah, I have pants on. Do you have pants on?
Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time. And I'm wearing a gorgeous forest green slack.
Oh, there you go. Oh, see?
Yeah.
I was fully expecting to see a bare leg, and you were in some sort of